Thanks for joining us virtually tonight, everyone. I'm just pulling up the agenda and I'll take attendance. Let's see. Oops, sorry about that. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. I had lost it in my many tabs. Okay, so this evening, we'll start out approving the previous meeting minutes after we take attendance. Ian, could you pull those up just so we can preview them on the screen? Do you have those handy? Okay, cool. Okay, Commissioner Montgomery?
Here.
Commissioner McCullough, not yet. Commissioner Smith?
I'm here.
Commissioner Dean?
I'm here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Evans? Here. Commissioner Ortiz?
Here.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have a quorum and we have Mummy and Ian and Captain Kim, thank you. Looks like we might have other folks. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so first order of business, we'll review and approve the meeting minutes from November 8th, which was our first investigation review. Does everyone know that they received a copy of this? Wonderful. Any questions or corrections? Okay, I'll hear a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes.
I move that we approve the meeting. Sorry.
Okay,
Wonderful.
Ahead, please.
I second.
Okay.
David.
David
Then
moves,
I
Lisa
move.
seconds.
Okay.
All in favor, aye? Aye.
Okay.
All
Aye.
opposed, nay? Wonderful. Any abstentions? Okay, wonderful. We did want to clarify for our voting that if anyone abstains, we just want a verbal abstention so that we can keep notes on that. Okay, but with that in the clear, we will move on to our second investigation review. Lisa and I were the investigation leads for this, so we updated our discussion guide our discussion protocol a little bit just to put a little bit more structure to it. So I'll review kind of a summary of the incident and the allegations, talk about some of the questions that were raised. Then we'll hear from the IPA, the IPA for her to give comments on any reflection she has from the investigation, and we can ask questions about the IPA report. And then ACPD will have an opportunity to provide additional comments related to the investigation and take questions from the COB. And then Lisa and I will propose our recommended findings, and we can deliberate from there before voting. Do we have any questions before we get started? Wonderful. Okay. So this complaint came in from a community member directly to ACPD by voicemail. And the complaint was an allegation that the community member was being harassed by officers citing unprofessional behavior during multiple traffic stops for the same expired tag violation. So as a review of the log files made it clear that the first stop was actually from Virginia State Patrol. So there were 3 total stops, but only 2 were from ACPD. So for the purposes of this review, we will talk about the events during the 2 stops initiated by ACPD for expired tags. So the second 2 stops were a few weeks after the first stop, but they were within 3 days of each other. So that might have contributed to the feeling that this was, personal or directed. But during the first stop, the traffic stop was initiated by a car with 2 officers, one who had a field training officer with him for being new. And so he noticed the expired tag and followed the vehicle for a few miles while running additional information to see if the tags were expired. But the car pulled into a parking lot, and so the officers initiated a traffic stop. and this happened in a parking lot where the complainant responded to the kind of identification of his expired tags, saying that he'd already had a court date for this and that it was embarrassing to be pulled over near his place of work, which it doesn't seem like the police officers had knowledge of. But so the complainant told Officer 1, that it was in his place of work, and Officer 1 issued a written warning for the expired vehicle registration instead of a citation. So there was a request during the initial conversation from the complainant to speak with a supervisor, but because of the time for processing the information and then going back to issue the warning, he decided to go to work and not wait for a supervisor to come and take a complaint. So 3 days later, there was a second stop initiated by ACPD in response to a radar detected speeding violation going 69 miles per hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone. On approaching the vehicle, the officer noticed the expired tags and ended up issuing a citation for the vehicle registration violation and gave a warning for the speeding infraction. At this point, the complainant was reiterating that he'd already been stopped for this registration violation and wanted to speak with a supervisor. So a supervising officer responded to the scene and had a conversation with the complainant that lasted several minutes. During that exchange, the supervising officer noted that it's possible to get a ticket every day until the registration is expired, as long as the vehicle's on the road. And so there was an exchange about whether or not the supervising officer, would have initiated a tow for this infraction, and conversation about, the process and the financial kind of hardship involved in taking care of the violation, which had already been scheduled for a court date. So it was after that exchange that the complainant called and left a voicemail for ACPD OPR, filing a complaint alleging by harassment, kind of bias policing. And so the two policies that we're looking at here are bias-free policing and the personal contacts policy. Do you all have the discussion plan open? I included the relevant policy definitions under personal contacts and bias-free policing. And then there was kind of a step-by-step walking through that in the IPA and OPR reports of kind of considerations around this. So something that Lisa and I discussed was obviously, it's challenging to evaluate something like this where, financial hardship for vehicle property taxes, could mean that it's very difficult to be able to pay your registration if you can't go to work where, you have to drive your vehicle to get there. So definitely some mitigating questions and concerns. Lisa, is there anything you want to add to the summary? No? Okay. So in both the IPA and the OPR reports, these policy violation allegations are exonerated. I think next we'll hear from Mummy on her comments related to the investigation, and we can ask her any follow-up questions that we have. Mummy, do you want to add to the summary? Are there any details you want to highlight? If you're talking, you might be on mute.
Is it me or Anika that was trying to speak?
Oh, I don't know. Anika, were you trying to ask a question?
No.
Okay.
Mummy, do you have comments you want to add to the investigation, any elements of the investigation or the traffic stops or complaint?
No, not per se about the complaint. I think this one was one where I did not, in my observation, find any evidence that would support sustaining either one of the allegations against the officers, which is why I went with a finding of exonerated even versus not sustained, because there wasn't necessarily like some form of information that may have been like leaning one way or the other, but just didn't meet the preponderance of the evidence standard. Instead, it was a situation where, having reviewed all of the information collectively and objectively, I didn't see any evidence that would support a biased policing or a personal contacts violation. But I did, in my comments, you know, want to just kind of start a dialogue about a larger conversation here in looking at, certainly I could understand why the complainant felt that there was some sort of, coerced effort to like follow or harass him, just because of how back to back these stops were and the number of stops. But I do think that, the officers exercise their discretion in various ways in responding to the stops. But I think, even though the allegations in this case were not sustained, the kind of comments I left in the end of my report were more so geared towards how do we have kind of like broader conversations around, potential bias policing issues that occur during traffic stops, or even how to like more holistically address concerns where community members feel that they have been particularly targeted or treated in a biased manner. So that was kind of the general, kind of reflection that I gave, at the conclusion of looking at the report, or looking at the investigation rather. And happy to answer any specific questions if there were any.
Just to be clear, there's no evidence of any communication between the Virginia State Police and the Arlington County Police, right? In connection
No.
with, yeah.
The stop by the Virginia State Police happened before, like in the preceding month, before the two stops that we're looking at in this context, which were the ones effectuated by Arlington County Police Department officers.
Right. But there was no evidence that they had communicated something to the Arlington County Police to say, look out for this guy, there's, right? Yeah.
No.
So we do want to talk more, as Mommy said, about some of these issues, right? But are we waiting until ACPD speaks to have that conversation, or when's the right time to have that conversation? I just don't know.
Yeah, let's go into discussion after we hear from ACPD, but if we have questions for Mummy on her kind of comments and assessment, I would do that now. Gary?
Gary, you're on mute.
You're muted.
It's always one more button. I'd like to follow up on Mummy's thing on the bias-free policing angle. I have a couple of thoughts there, but I would defer to listen to ACPD first, as Lisa suggested.
Okay, wonderful. Captain Kim, do you want to add any comments or context to the investigation?
The only thing that I would say is that, thank you, Julie, for, I guess, summarizing the complaint. I think during our review, it was determined that the 2 or 3 mile following distance is actually not accurate. So I think the vehicle was spotted in the 1800 block of Glebe Road and then stopped 0.4 miles later. So 2 or 3 miles, if you think about it, is probably half of Arlington County. It's like literally crossing the entire county. So that's a little bit longer, obviously a lot longer than what was done. And then I think the IPA and ACPD are in alignment with the disposition of this, allegation, which is that the 2 allegations that were posed against this officer have been exonerated. There's no evidence to suggest that either personal contacts violation or bias-free policing.
Thank you for correcting that. Do folks have other questions about the kind of details of the scenario or the complaint itself?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the and I don't have the bias-free policing in front of me or the personal contacts. So I think I understand the context and the rationale for the exonerations of these. But in the bias-free policing context, so as I look at this, and I'm trying to,
There it is.
I can see from the eyes of the, thank you.
Mhm.
I can see that exactly why those are, but this is kind of, I want to look at this from a different angle, okay, to make sure that we review this thoroughly, not just for this case, but for all cases. So as I look at this, and I'm sure the policy in there never, so the officers have discretion. For example, seeing that this has happened before, I'm wondering, though you can't be prescriptive for police officers to do this in the spirit of bias-free policing, and I'm not Monday night quarterbacking, I'm trying to see how things can, um, prevent complaints like this, and so was there any conversation between the officer and the complainant as to why he had not done this yet? This gets back into, Mummy, you were asking a question. Well, maybe the guy's like paying for his in-laws to live with him, or there's some other situation out there that would help the officer make a decision. Obviously, it's his word versus theirs, and I'm sure that people aren't trained to know whether somebody's lying or not. But in this spirit of bias-free policing, I mean, there's some unusual situations out there, and that you just don't know. And so, though by the book everything is exonerated and checked, but I think in this, it just kind of opens the door, Mummy, like you said. I totally agree with everybody here, but in this bias-free policing, there are some groups out there that have stuff going on, and whether just a question, hey, is there something reason, you had that 1-2 months ago, and now you got this back to back. It's unlucky, gosh, here we are again. It's a violation. We can write it up again. I mean, everything that was said was accurate, and the officers acted in line with their training, with policies. But that's kind of this angle I'm pulling at is, and it's not that you can be prescriptive, but sometimes in this bias thing, not unconscious bias, but Mommy, I guess I'm trying to expand on that, on how you said that in the broader sense of things. I'm not trying to change the finding, because I agree with this, but I'm trying to open this up a little bit more as far as how we represent the community, probably in things that maybe you can't put in policy, right? So you can't tell people to ask those kind of questions, and it just depends, right? Sometimes we just have to go off the seat of our pants. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, or not, a couple of years ago, where I asked a question, hey, how's it really going? And the guy told me that he tried to commit suicide the day before. Not in policy or anything, but it's just more this understanding of the community, and not to change policies, but just this broader understanding. And I'll stop there.
Just to kind of briefly respond, and I don't want to in any way overpower the dialogue. This is meant to be a space where you all can kind of discuss and deliberate, but I do want to make sure that like the scope of what we're talking about here is more refined. When we talk about bias-free policing, we're talking about like what was the underlying reason for the stop before any communication happened. Was there any indication that, like in this context, that the officers pulled the complainant over for some reason other than, an expired tag? And were they profiling him because of his appearance, which is what he kind of expressed were his feelings that happened? So I think that is a different analysis than, okay, now that they have pulled him over, what is the best way to engage with him in terms of community policing and that sort of thing, and asking the questions. And I will say that I did feel like the officers, as I said earlier, exercised some discretion, and the first officer only gave him a written warning because he realized like this person is trying to get to work. So instead of doing a whole citation and what have you, this person has a court date coming up. I'm going to give him a written write-up and just to document that we had this stop, but not a citation. So that is an exercise of discretion. And I think in the second stop, there is also an exercise of discretion in that the complainant was actually stopped for speeding, and then it was discovered that the registration was expired, and the complainant got the citation for the registration and was given a warning for the speeding. I think maybe just a verbal one, even if that. So in both situations, I think there was some discretion exercise. From what I've reviewed, we didn't unpack further why the complainant hadn't paid his ticket until the conversation happened during the interview. And so I think, like, to that extent, I agree with you. I wish that the conversation had maybe come out a little bit more in the dialogue between the complainant and the officers, and maybe then we could have figured out some other way. But I think that is part of a larger like societal conversation of like, continuing to like perpetuate a cycle of like, court involvement and having to pay fees and fines when you're already struggling financially to like deal with the registration. And that's like part of a broader conversation that I, in all fairness, don't think that like ACPD could necessarily answer in their policy or, instruct officers on how to handle that, because it is a broader issue. But I do think, to the extent possible, trying to engage in those conversations more with community and figuring out a more like holistic approach to dealing with the problem. I certainly think that ACPD could be a valuable, like, partner in that dialogue, in that kind of larger societal conversation and figuring out what we can do. But, ultimately, like, this was a expired registration, and that is a violation, that could warrant a traffic citation. So they weren't not within their right to stop him or to issue the citation or the warning. But I think what you're getting at here is like, is this the right way to resolve this issue? Or like, knowing this person was experiencing a financial problem, would that have changed the kind of, engagement or the outcome here? Which I think that's a fair question. I think it's just like it's a broader conversation than just like what the officers in this particular instance were equipped to do. I hope
think
that
there
answers
was,
the question.
I'm grateful to you for narrowing our scope of focus to the reason for the stop in bias-free policing, and the rest of it being more personal contacts. That there was some discussion with the supervising officer of, financial hardship and the trade-off of like, the vehicles on the road. Part of this vehicle registration process is for making sure that vehicles that are on the road are safe. So there was, kind of a back and forth. The supervising officer explained that, you don't need an appointment at the DMV. You can drop in. You might wait longer. There was like, I think, a helpful connotation to some of the conversation that was had. I think, some issue was taken to the tone of like, I would have pulled, if I were you, I would have towed you. But there was, there was a lot of discretion involved in, I think, both stops in saying, this person already has involvement with the legal system to resolve this issue and is trying to do that. And so, I mean, the not getting a citation for the speeding violation, for example, was like a break, I think, in this case. So I agree that I didn't find anything in any of the evidence to suggest that there was a different reason for pulling them over, or, violation of personal contacts once they were pulled over, requesting the supervisor. I think the supervisor was there kind of to reinforce that, you're not really being harassed, but the longer you're driving around with an expired tag, the more likely you are to get a or multiple tickets. So, Dave?
Can I ask a question about so just to be clear, Arlington Police did give a citation for the second stop for the unregistered expired tags, right? And how did that impact with the existing ticket or matter that came from the state police? It's the same thing. It's the same exact issue, but I mean, was there some benefit to having a second citation? I mean, the first one didn't come from Arlington County Police, so but I'm not sure I understand. I mean, how that worked. Was the citation provided by Arlington for a later date for the same thing, or what was it?
Well, the first one was referred to court by state police for the violation. I think the second is just a violation citation for, you know, paying a fine for not having taken care of it.
Oh, okay. So it's not, so it's a
Captain Kim,
separate.
did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I think, David, your question, what I'm trying to understand is you're saying, does us issuing a second citation for the same thing impact the first citation? Is that what you're saying? Or what is the point of issuing a second citation if we think that a citation has already been issued?
Yeah, I guess it's the latter. I mean, unless
Okay.
it adds an additional fine or something. What is the difference?
It's just to ensure compliance. So, you know, typically if someone is issued a citation and they're told, listen, you need to get this taken care of, or just don't drive the vehicle. And I know there's been some hardships, and I do want to thank, you know, both Julie and Mummy for bringing up the fact that there was deference, you know, given to this motorist on both occasions by ACPD. Both times ACPD has shown a lot of deference with this particular case. But I will say this about expired registration citations in general, as they relate to, you know, court disposition, is that they're considered compliance offenses, meaning that you can stack 7 of them, but once you have them taken care of, all 7 of those can be dismissed in one fell swoop. So if you get those citations in Arlington, let's say hypothetically 7 citations for expired registration, you go to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, you show proof that you have updated your registration, and the Commonwealth's attorney generally, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but generally what they do 99 times out of 100 is they will sign a disposition basically saying, we are dismissing all of these cases because you are in compliance. And what others have referred to in the past is this is just to ensure safety of the motor vehicles that are operating around other members of the public. The second thing I want to bring up is, because I think we all know how long it was, but maybe those who are observing this meeting, I want to just bring up the fact that that registration was expired for an extended period of time, right? So we're talking like 6 to 8 months. We're not talking about like 3 to 4 days or like 30 days. We are talking about almost, I believe it's probably about 6 to 7 months expired. Okay, so there's a certain point in the DMV after your registration is expired, that registration is no longer considered valid. It's like driving around on a car with no tags, and it is subject to impoundment, and that ensures that the vehicle has been inspected, that it went through emissions, because you are required to go through emissions and all these. So all those things come into play with registration. So it was expired for a really long time, and yet the officer still showed deference to this individual because of the situation that they were in.
No, that's helpful. Was there a fine associated with is there a fine associated with any of these citations?
Yes. So,
Yeah,
but
right.
again, most people will come to court with the registration updated and show the judge that they've updated the registration. And if you come to court 99 times out of 100, then the judge will just dismiss the case. All the court system and law enforcement, all we're interested in with this particular offense is compliance, which is
Okay.
Let's get the vehicles registered that are operating on the road. That's the biggest concern.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions around the circumstances or disposition? Okay. Lisa and I agree that our recommendation is that we adopt, or our recommendation is that we agree with both the IPA and the OPR report findings. And then so we'll hear a motion to vote on. Let's see, I should have I did this last time too. I'll hear a motion to adopt Lisa's and my recommendation that we agree with both findings.
I move that we agree to adopt your recommendation to agree with the IPA and the ACPD.
Wonderful. Any second?
Second.
Gary, wonderful. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Aye. Sorry, I was on mute.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Anika, will you confirm aye, nay, or abstain?
You may be
Anika, you
on,
may be muted.
yeah.
Well, the vote passes. I will follow up with Anika to get her, but okay. So with that completed, let's see. Okay, so next on our agenda, we have provision for open discussion, and then we had a request for public comment tonight. So I know we have a couple of items for open discussion. Gary, I think you wanted to provide an update on just some community outreach items, and then Mummy, you have updates on the ordinance. Okay.
Yeah, so mine is real quick. So I've got a email ready to send out. I'll courtesy copy you, David. I think David's going to be my chief assistant. And it's to all of the community associations in Arlington. There might be one or two stragglers, but we're not going to be able to get to all of them right away anyway. And what I plan to do is send that list to everybody. We're not going to get all these at once, but my goal is that we reach out and touch each of these organizations here within the, hopefully the first 6 months of next year. We did one. We got a lot of feedback from that on both the flyer that we sent out, some edits to that from the Q&A. There were some good feedback that we can update that, David, based on the feedback I think I shared with you, kind of the feedback, so we can refine that read ahead that they give to each of the associations. It's kind of a spinoff off of Ian's one pager. And so I think we'll get that nice and tight that we'll send out as a read ahead. And my hope is that we do in-person visits. We did the last one virtual. It worked out because I did it from Alabama because I was there, but it worked out well. About a 10-minute presentation and Q&A, and the Q&A lasted longer. It lasted about 15 minutes. So it was good two-way interaction. So that's number one. And so hopefully this is something I think we all need to pitch in. Hopefully your neighborhood association or something that you'll at least stick your hand up and attend. And then David and I have talked about divvying up the rest of them. I enjoy doing this. The second thing is Ian is going to send me a list. I want to try to build a list, and I'll send it out to everybody for any input. And that's the 2024 community engagement plan. So for instance, I just was at an event last Friday. It was a Christmas neighborhood thing. They had rides for kids. They had various things. And there were a couple of Arlington community associations there that I was actually surprised. So Captain Kim, we're going to get a copy of yours. We're going to probably plagiarize off several organizations, county organizations of events where we can, not just the ones that ACPC does, but I want ours to be ours. And so I'll take input from everybody when I send that out. And this is kind of one of those things is let's just get going on it. I'm sure the 2024 one won't be perfect, and we'll kind of keep refining it along the way. But I wanted to thank Ian in advance for helping me gather a list from the various organizations that then we can build our own community engagement plan. So any
Thank you.
questions? Thanks.
Good.
The other thing I just want to add quickly is for these investigation reviews, we will likely have to be able to do more than one per meeting in order to get through them as we start clearing them out. This is kind of the startup pace of what we had. So if there's feedback on the information in the discussion plan or the kind of process of like reminding folks to do the evidence reviews, we'll see how that goes over time. But the other thing is we'll be looking for the co-lead to develop the discussion plan and lead the discussion, just so that everyone kind of has the opportunity to participate in that process and it's not just me doing that. So I think we'll have a plan for the January meeting in a couple weeks, but before that, we've got some year closeout things. I'm going to circulate a draft of the investigation review number 1 report. Just a kind of a summary of what we talked about in terms of considerations in that last investigation review. That report becomes public. And so I'll give a sample comment in case, in addition to the kind of general recap of the COB's discussion, if individual members want to attribute to themselves some personalized reflection on the complaint summary or the investigation or the disposition, members of the community can start to hear from us individually on our reflections on those cases. So we don't always have to do it. We don't all have to do it. We don't have to do it at all, but I want to make space for that in our reports, recognizing that these, investigation reviews will vary by circumstance. And while we may all, while we will vote by majority, we do want the community to kind of hear our reflections on the individual scenario. So we'll get that done. And then Dave, I'll follow up with you about the annual report offline. Sorry, those are my other 2 notes. Mummy's been coordinating several different things on the back end and wanted to give us an update on some changes happening with the authorizing ordinance.
Thanks, Julie. Actually, a couple of notes that I wanted to make before we go into that. But on the community engagement front, as probably many of you might know, there have been 2 kind of relatively close in time shootings in the Green Valley community that the community is concerned about. I have been kind of briefed that this is a conversation just in terms of like the broader concerns about, safety and policing in Green Valley that is going to be kind of brought to a more like public dialogue, and that we want to, that there's a desire to kind of like try to bring the community together to figure out how these concerns can be addressed. And so I am hoping that we can be engaged in that conversation, be present for some of those conversations, maybe even, create space for some of those conversations via some sort of like panel or, listening session or something like that. But I think it's definitely an area that we, in the work that we're doing, should be engaged in and should be helping to facilitate the dialogue and figure out some solutions in support of the community there. So I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that. And that we are, plugging in there in terms of engagement. Also related to 2024, I think Julie started to touch on this regarding the meetings. I know we had started a discussion last time about potentially starting to do more than 1 meeting a month. I'm not sure where we landed on that or if we're still kind of simmering on that idea, but I just wanted to throw that back out there for consideration. We could also see how it feels to do multiple investigations in 1 meeting with our first January meeting, and then circle back to the conversation to see, how many investigations we think we could ideally take up in 1 month, and whether that's, doing multiple meetings a month, or just multiple investigations in the one meeting that we have, or both. But I definitely wanted to just flag that we should circle back to that to see if we can try to get some of these cases that are in queue, these complaints that are in queue, taken care of, and get kind of like out of the backlog a little bit in 2024. Any thoughts on that before I move to the other?
I would like to try to do 2 investigations in January in one meeting to see, what that cadence would feel like. We certainly don't want it to feel rushed, and if we get through one and we feel like we don't have time, then we can, push it. But I think it seems to me like we've got enough of a protocol that we should know in advance if there's an investigation that's just going to require more dialogue and we can't do more than one at a time. So let's try that first.
That sounds good.
I think the challenge is just having to do them all in person. It's like it would be fine to do multiple a month if we didn't have to do them all in person. I think it's just the difficulty of trying to do them in person. So I second what Julie's plan. Hopefully that'll work. Thanks.
My other thought around that, Lisa, was that if we're meeting our, and I just need to revisit this, but if we're meeting our annual meeting requirement of, I think it's 11 meetings with no more than 2 all virtual, if the meetings beyond that have to be subject to the same in-person policy. So I'll follow up on that and see what I can find out. I suspect that it is still subject to the restrictions, but it's worth finding out since this is kind of a different situation.
I believe the rule is 2 or 25%. So if you all end up meeting more than 11 times, then it's possible that you could have, check my math because I'm an attorney, not a mathematician, but maybe 4 virtual meetings instead of 2 if you're meeting twice as much as when you normally would.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah, Mommy, what's our current backlog?
I'd have to double check that number because when I say backlog, I just mean cases that have been completed by OPR that we then need to look at. So it wouldn't be like the number of investigations, period.
I got it.
But I can calculate that number. I still know off the top of my head, but I would say that it's like more than a few,
That summary will be in our annual report. So folks who are listening can see kind of a summary of how many came in, how many were exonerated by evidence, how many have been cleared, and how many have been reviewed, and how many are left to go through.
Yeah, I agree with 2 also. January.
Okay. That sounds good. And there may be instances where like we have a couple that are like more simple in nature. I mean, you might be able to do 3 in a hearing. So we'll start with 2 in January and see how that feels, and then circle back to the conversation, it sounds like. No problem. Thank y'all. So the only other kind of administrative thing I wanted to touch on real quick was training, just to remind folks to complete your ride-along trainings as well as your Leading with the Race trainings before the end of the calendar year to make sure you're in compliance with your annual training requirements. And I think that was it for me administratively. And then one other thing I wanted to do just before going into the ordinance updates was also to just like formally and publicly make sure that we took a moment to recognize Christian Dorsey, who's the current chair of the county board. The end of this month will be the end of his term and his service on the county board. I believe that they're going to have some sort of reception for him on the 19th. And so I certainly plan to be there to, express gratitude and recognize his service on the county board, and would certainly encourage anyone who's available to come. But I just wanted to particularly take a moment to recognize him, as he's been one of our COB liaisons since I, joined the county, and definitely has played an instrumental role in standing up the oversight board as well as my position. And supporting our needs and whatnot behind the scenes as well. So he wasn't able to join us tonight, unfortunately, because of other commitments, but I do plan to attend on the 19th. And Julie and I have coordinated to put together a kind of joint recognition for him on behalf of the COB and the IPA.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Do we have the timing of the, have they announced or have they had the election, or what's the timing of his replacement?
They'll be joining at the beginning of the year.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I guess, and we'll also find out, I suppose, sometime in the near future too, who would be replacing him as a COB liaison.
Okay.
Okay, so I know I've gotten some questions about the ordinance revisions to Chapter 69.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but
No worries.
just before we get away from the training thing, Ian, will you let us know if, I think I've done everything, but will you let us know if we haven't done something?
Yes, I've reached out to some people, and I'm going to reach out to everyone else
Okay.
again.
I just
I
want
have
to
the
be
most.
sure.
Yep, I have the most recent. So I'm going to send it out to everybody.
Okay,
And
thank you.
also-
Sorry, Mimi, go ahead.
No worries.
No, and also, who do I coordinate the rides on again? I know last year it was Captain Chamberlain. Is it the same, or?
There's an
I'll send
email
you-
with a form.
Yes,
Okay.
there is an email in there, but I'll forward it to everybody again so that they
Thank
have it. I
you.
think I included it in an email actually yesterday or the day before.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank y'all. Making sure that you have all the training info. Yeah, so on the ordinance revisions, so I had circulated the kind of draft that we were working through. There have been more revisions made since then. I am expecting that the publishing of the draft will happen between this evening and tomorrow. So unfortunately, to my knowledge, before we started this meeting, it had not been publicly posted yet, but it should be. And as soon as I know that it is, I'll make sure that you all get a link so that you can see what the kind of final draft is that's being taken up before the county board, which will be this Saturday morning on the 16th. It's seeking to make some kind of administrative clarifications about the kind of role of the IPA, the COB, kind of fine tuning some of what was in the original ordinance related to like training, and kind of more mirroring what was in the MOU related to how you all would go about like ascertaining the annual training and that sort of thing. I think that it will certainly help to, clarify some of those things administratively. I think that there are still areas that need to be addressed in terms of my ability to publish my investigation reports. And also our access to internal investigations. We are still, that's still a work in progress. And so, I just have concerns that has not been fully addressed in this particular version of the ordinance. Hopeful that, we'll continue to work through that issue and achieve that in future ordinance revisions. But as of what I know in terms of what I believe will be in the current draft, it does not address those two issues in what I think would be like the most full manner that would give our oversight entity like the access and the authority that we fully need to be able to fully exercise the duties and the scope of the work that we're trying to achieve here. So still some work to do in that regard, but I'm certainly tremendously grateful for the work that like Matt and Christian specifically did to try to move this ordinance, move the revisions of the ordinance in a way that was going to make the ordinance more effective and clear, and just kind of clear up some of the confusions that were the confusion that was occurring with the original language. So that is kind of the summary. Hopefully once it gets published and you all have had an opportunity to review it, I'll be able to kind of answer more specific questions about any questions or comments or concerns you have about the draft language.
Thank you
So,
for,
Mummy,
go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh.
Is the draft proposed changes, is that available or not yet? Is that what you're referring to? Hasn't been published?
That's what I'm referring to, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for sharing that insight. I mean, I think have talked about this a lot in our kind of training and stand up. This is a new body, it's a new structure, having a hybrid organization. It has a lot of advantages and is really valuable. I mean, for me especially, I'm very grateful for all of the expertise, talent, time, and support that Mummy and Ian, bring to this process. At the administrative level, there are so many stakeholders involved in this work that having those conversations and building just like we're doing with the investigation review process of figuring out how, what information goes to whom, when, how do we coordinate, enough knowledge of everything while protecting privacy and, all these things. I do want to be mindful that, this changes to this won't always be easy, figuring out how to keep doing this work and bring more meaning and more engagement with the community and more, kind of positive connection is, the success will be measured in the long term. And that means that in the short term, we all want to be very deliberate and mindful about changes that either bolster or compromise the kind of long-term viability and value of this work. And so I'm really grateful for all of the kind of time and conversation that went into it. I think, for me, partly, being briefed at different intervals is really helpful to kind of know where the COB may, need to have more kind of awareness and involvement versus, where Gary and I can kind of handle things in the leadership meeting. But we wanted to kind of just use this opportunity to reinforce the fact that a major value behind this work is in providing transparency to the community and giving them the ability to follow along and understand how this works and what the process is and what underlying issues may be. So we will use this forum in that way, to a constructive end, looking to kind of support our mission of increasing and maintaining trust between the community and the police and making sure that that's always the focus of our work. So Mummy, thank you for the update, and we'll look for the kind of updated language and probably need to have kind of ongoing conversations. I think we've had other conversations about, over the life cycle of this work, which we hope endures, for a long time. There may be other kinds of changes that we think are necessary to increase our effectiveness and increase the ability, it's hard being volunteers and not having background in this. So I just want to echo my support for your, involvement in the process and your really kind of dedication to being mindful and thoughtful about this. I know that others, involved in those conversations are kind of coming to it with the same attitude of wanting to preserve our ability to do this work well. But really grateful for how much work you put into thinking through and advancing a lot of those conversations on our behalf.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's certainly a evolving piece and has a lot of different aspects that you kind of have to constantly balance, which is that I know from my experience that we need certain levels of unfettered access or authority in order for our work to have the meaningful impact that we're seeking to have. But also understanding that when you are starting up an oversight entity, that there has to be a certain level of engagement and education that happens, because I think the kind of natural, mindset of auditing or oversight is that it feels like it could be punitive. And I think that is, not unique to, any stakeholders in Arlington. I think that's just the broad kind of perspective about auditing and oversight. And I think just as a, as a field, as oversight practitioners, we have to continue to demonstrate the value of our work and how we can be an asset to police departments and the community and our jurisdictions as a whole, in that the more access and authority we have, the better equipped we are to, identify potential issues or help to inform about how things could be handled in a way that is going to continue to build trust and transparency and accountability with the community. So that is a process, and understanding that, I think it is still my goal that we continue to push forward and get to where we need to be in terms of what I think we could and should be doing. But it is not lost on me that is it takes time. So that is the dynamic that we're constantly balancing here.
Yeah, well, it is a lot of time, and we really appreciate your involvement. So hopefully in 3 to 5 years we'll all feel so equipped. But in the interim, we are grateful to be able to rely on you and kind of build that together. So Gary?
Thank you.
Okay, I got the mic that time. Hey, just a couple of items real quick, and thank you. I ditto everything you said, and Mummy, thank you for opening the door for Arlington County here and get this, really the work you and Ian are doing is, from where we sit, coming in here on these meetings and stuff, is pretty amazing. So the first thing I want to piggyback on, so the community engagement thing, I think we need to write, so a separate part of our community engagement, what you reminded me of, whether it's Green Valley or there could be some other thing, good or bad, right? It really doesn't matter whether it's a shooting, whatever, but there probably would be some criteria that we would do some kind of a community piece, kind of like you said, how do we plug in to support that, whether it's you and Julie or you and Dave but it's just a subset of community. And to me, it's like an event-based community engagement philosophy, kind of a concept. And so not prescriptive, but I think it's more than just going and talking to, as you pointed out, it's more than just going to these associations and educating what we're doing. I think what the COB can do during those events, good or bad, how we can plug in to make sure that's a part of our broader community engagement plan. So I'll talk to David about that offline. The next thing I want to ask about, and I apologize if I've missed it, but our annual report. So can we just touch on that again? I mean, who's it to? I mean, I'm imagining that something, is this just county manager? Or is there something that we owe the community, either on our website or something about just COB and, in whole, to help enhance that thing? Oh yeah, we've got them working for us, but just if you can just update me on that. And I apologize if I've missed something, but
Gary, are you asking about the annual report or the investigation report?
No, annual. I'm talking about broader COB. Do we just kind of do we have an annual report due? And I thought, yeah, you're nodding your head. That's what I believe. And so is that something, so who's responsible for this, and what input do you need, or is it already done?
David and I are working on it. We have an initial draft with most of the information outlined. We need to update the latest investigation kind of numbers and process and training by the end of the year. So we'll submit that to the county board on the 31st, and then it will be available to the public.
Perfect.
Okay, we do want to get to public comment, so I'll see if there's anything else for open discussion before I say my last thing, which is happy birthday, Mummy. Mummy's birthday is tomorrow. And
All right.
our only regret in having our one virtual meeting this year was that we didn't get to get together and have festive holiday cheer. So we will be definitely doing that in January. I hope you have something fun planned and time to rest, and that everyone's safe, happy, and healthy at home, because I know we've all had the sicknesses going around. That was
Thank
my
you,
other
Julie.
reason for being glad.
I appreciate that. My regret was that I didn't get to make me and Ian decorate the room for you all again and have a little holiday party, but we'll have to do something festive together when we reconvene in 2024.
Maybe we'll do COB holidays in July. And we'll just have our July holiday be our, we can decorate festively or earlier than that.
We can
Okay.
have a summer fiesta.
Gary, do you have another comment or is your hand raised from before?
No, I don't need it today, but last question input is our schedule for 2024 as far as what weeks. I'm not tracking
I'll make sure that gets sent out.
Okay, thank you.
Are y'all planning to keep, that's actually a good question. Are you planning to keep the second Wednesday of the month as your meeting cadence, I guess, if you will?
I'll circulate a doodle poll of agree or disagree before we open that Pandora's box.
I will say I did book the rooms just in case already because they do typically fill up quickly. But whatever day we eventually choose, I'll be able to book those meetings in advance so that they're on all of your calendars.
Ian, you're the best. For many, many more reasons than that, but also I appreciate your logistical support. Okay, so we are prepared to hear public comment. Let's see.
Julie, how much time did you want to allot per member
I
of the
think we'll
public?
do 5 minutes for public comment today.
We do
but-
have a public comment submission from Utshab Barua. If they're on the line.
Before we go into public comment, though, can we just quickly
Yes, I'll share
refresh, our audience on the public comment
Oh, yes.
guidelines, just to make sure we're all on the same
I have them
page.
up. 1 second, I will pull them up.
I have them up right now on the screen,
Oh.
Julie.
Wonderful, thank you.
Are you all able to see them?
It's a little hard to read, but maybe can you
Okay.
enlarge it at all?
Yeah. What about now?
That's good. That's really good.
Just a key component is essentially that if any comments are being made in relation to a specific complaint, that we make sure not to identify anyone other than obviously the speaker. If they want to identify themselves, more than welcome to do so. But any other parties to a complaint should be kept anonymized.
Then we welcome public comment from. I
And
can't
by
see.
anonymized, Mummy, you mean using terms such as the officer or a other
complainant.
citizen as an example, correct?
That's right. So anyone else's names that might have been a witness or an officer involved in the underlying complaint or incident if a complaint hasn't yet been filed.
So we
Thank
have
you for that
two
clarifying question.
phone guests with no names associated. Is someone online to give public comment? Going once. Gosh, I'm nervous that our investigation review was so expedient that we might have goofed off their expectation of timing. When we might need to consider that about taking public comment on the front end of the meeting so people have a set time that they can join to provide public comment. If they were expecting for us not to be ready for public comment until later, but we adjourn early, we'll have missed their opportunity. So why don't we'll wait on a few more minutes to see if someone volunteers public comment. Otherwise, we could invite them to speak at the beginning of the next meeting and move our public comment portion up.
And I'll follow
Sure.
up with the individual who registered online, let them know about the time change there.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, and I also saw some communication with the community members who joined us, and I am just so delinquent on my non-work email. I saw that I was supposed to follow up with them, so I'll circle back with them as well. But I wanted to thank you for joining us. We're grateful for public participation, and we welcome you anytime. But thank you again for following up with them to provide more information. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Well, I'm going to suggest that we.
Well, since we
adjourn.
have a couple of minutes, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So, in January, will we be sort of doing a little stock taking and figuring out sort of a work plan for 2024?
Yeah.
I know we have a million things going on, but I was hoping we could, get some plan going on data, because we keep talking about data, and I think we really need to start thinking about the things we want to look at. And I'm sure there's other stuff. I know how busy we are, but I thought maybe if we had the opportunity in January, stock taking might make sense.
Sure. I think that I believe the ACPD report gets released in May, and that's where they report their data. So one thing we might want to do is prioritize, kind of re-reviewing the data provided in their report before their next year report goes out, so that we can give them any feedback on things that we think we want to just suggest that may be easy for them to make modifications to that, Ian had, provided a really good example from Baltimore about, the oversight board working with the police to help give them the opportunity to report in more detail or in a format or, whatever it is that seems like it would be more digestible or useful to the public. So I would say that our first kind of target deadline would be making sure that we have considered and provided any input to them, a month before their report is supposed to come out in case they want to make any changes based on our input. So Lisa, could I ask you to draft an agenda item for January of like how we want to have that discussion and where to get started? And then we can just keep it on the agenda, monthly for 5 or 15 minutes, depending on how much input we have. And that way we can be, proactive about keeping that in our conversation. I'm happy to add that to our regular agenda.
Yeah, and I'll reach out to Ian because we should probably have another I think you presented some information previously, or did we just talk about you presenting information about the Baltimore stuff? I can't recall.
Yeah, we discussed it, and then I think I showed some stuff briefly during open discussion, but it was nothing related to Arlington.
Yeah, so maybe you and I can touch base and brainstorm about some things we can suggest. But also, yes, I'll just
traveling over the holidays, so call
yeah.
time.
I'm going to Dollywood. I've never been.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gary, 1 second. I see Captain Kim and Chief Penn have joined us back on camera.
Yeah, so I just, hi, everybody. I just wanted to comment on that. If there's a way, if you're talking about our annual report. So if we can have conversations, and I'm happy for us to be a part of that, but a little earlier than a month before, because we start really churning that. It's like a lot to put together. So I'd be happy to be a part of the conversation, but if there's just a way, because like if it's mid-April, that might be a little too late for us. That's it.
Sure.
I'm happy for us to be a part of the conversation. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, we just want that was my goal. So I'm glad you weighed in on your timeline. We just want to front end, a review that, there's no need for us to put something in our report if we have a recommendation and you guys are just as happy to put it in your report. So we'll front end that in January and February. And then after we have our initial conversation kind of amongst ourselves, we'll set something up to kind of talk with you about thoughts or ideas we have maybe in the March timeline, February, March.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the input. Knowing the timeline makes it easier for us to not bombard you at the last minute.
I appreciate that.
Certainly. That's just good common humanity, I think. So sorry, Garrett, go ahead. please.
No, so Lisa, you and I talked about this when we first started, right? So, and I like this initial approach. I certainly would like to join that conversation with you in January. And really, I see there's some areas here that the data will be the same, and there could be, I'm not saying there will be, but based on some of the things that Lisa and I have seen in other jurisdictions of data, what's collected, what category, how it's being used, there could be areas that we do independently. I don't know what they are, but right now I like the approach that you've suggested. So I look forward to doing it. And it's all same thing, how to improve the community. It's not, pointing, it's just basically how to use data better. And data is something you got to be, it's got to be careful with it, and then how you interpret and stuff. So I would love to join you, Lisa. And I know you're way ahead of me on this data stuff, but I just want to be, if I can throw a nugget in there to help, I'd be glad to.
Yeah, and Mummy's done really great work kind of tracking the amount of time needed per investigation review. And so there are probably other kinds of performance metrics that if we, can think about how we want to measure our own activities to support other updates to the annual report. I mean, this year's report, like last year's, is going to be pretty high level and summative because we're just still in the kind of forming and norming stages. But I think we all want to include as much kind of rich content as we can that would be meaningful to the public, not just pie charts for pie charts. I don't love pie that much, but it is the holidays, so I do love pie. But okay, Lisa, let's touch base and we'll put that on the agenda for January so we can just have an initial conversation. And it doesn't have to be, a formal briefing. It can just be, some initial thinking. But I think if we have some structure around what questions we're trying to answer, then we'll get to a more, focused agenda for February and iterate from there. We can just keep it on deck.
Yep, great. So I'll work with Ian and Gary to figure out how we want to frame it for January as an initial kickoff.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Yeah, good idea. Thanks for the reminder. Okay. Comments, questions, concerns?
Also interested, I mean, I think that's a great effort to make. Just second all the points that have been made about the data. That's definitely a key part of what we, may be able to help with. So I'm glad, Lisa and Gary, you're looking at that, and I'm right behind you.
We just had we had it previously, and maybe I should have done this before. Somebody commented previously, I was just listening in. I was tuning in to listen and was not here to give public comment. We had another guest submit a question. Can the draft ordinance include a version that includes publicizing IPA reports and access to internal complaints and investigation? Apologizing for not being able to go on video. Amy, thank you for your question. We welcome virtual participation. We welcome all participation in our meetings and process. I think that, and Mummy can speak to this better, but I think the current draft proposed changes have been set for the meeting this weekend. Future, ordinance considerations would be under a different update. Mummy, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that the draft that will be published at some point is, broadly what I think the county board will look at as being the draft that is like in its most final version, saving, them having to actually vote on it. But the fact that it does not address my ability to publicly to publish my internal investigative reports in an anonymized fashion, or give full access to internally generated complaints and investigations, are the concerns that I, have raised in terms of what I think the current draft is lacking. So that's why I said I'm hopeful that we'll continue to work that and that it will be at some point in the future, addressed in a more expansive way. But it is not currently in the draft ordinance, to my knowledge.
Okay. Gary?
This is my last question.
You don't have to
Uh,
say that. You can have
No,
questions.
so, going back to Green Valley here, so I appreciate you bringing that up, Mummy. So as a COB, so we know what your role is and the access you have, but from the COB, just using that as an example. So are we basically, do I get my information from the ACBD updates as a COB? That's what I'm assuming is we get our updates from there, but I don't know. I guess I'm asking a question. Is there anything that is releasable that we can get updates on outside of waiting for the public ACBD releases on the Green Valley incident?
Well, anything related to an active criminal investigation, we would not get access to, neither myself or the COB. So it wouldn't be, and also I don't necessarily have any inclination at this point that it would be something that we would end up reviewing in the form of an administrative investigation. In other words, it's not a situation where like an officer is involved in, whatever the underlying incident is. This is more of like a broader conversation around community policing and specifically like the sense of public safety in Green Valley. So I think, the specifics of whatever the underlying like criminal incident may or may not be is not what the like focal point is for the scope of our work. I would say it's more so engaging the community about their, kind of the impact that these incidents are having on them and how we can help to facilitate the dialogue between the community and the police department or the county at large to address, the impacts of what's going on in the Green Valley community. Certainly if some information related to the underlying criminal matters at some point becomes relative to like the scope of the work that we're doing, we could access it, but it wouldn't be until an active investigation has been completed on the criminal side.
Okay, so what I interpret that means is we as a COB are just the community at this point, right? So I remember seeing the latest update that said, I think what was in there, Captain Kim, if not mistaken, it was like a black male was seen, blah, 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 blah. So, there is a little bit of stuff being fed, but I guess as far as the COB is concerned, any active investigation, we simply receive what the community gets. Is that kind of the summary? Outside of you, because as the IPA, you have, we have established protocol for your role. But for us at this current point, our updates, and this is what I'm just confirming, our updates on these kind of things are simply like any other citizen in the community as the COB. That's what I'm trying to just validate.
I see. Well, I certainly think like as a result of the working relationship that I have with the police department, that I can certainly like engage in dialogue with leadership at the police department and ask questions about like things that are going on, and how it impacts, this kind of like broader scope of what we're doing here in terms of, community police relationships. I think that if there were, as I said, more specifics that then became relevant to what we were doing, I would imagine, and this is not a topic that I think like we really delved into very much in the MOU, but I would imagine that like the appropriate course would be for us to treat it similar to kind of how we treat certain investigations, and that like I'm getting the more kind of specific, briefings that are like more detailed in nature. And then when there is a point at which the police department is able to share like maybe a higher level of information that is more than what the public gets, but the situation is more in a position where they can share more details. That might be something that we would consider doing, like in the form of a briefing from ACP directly to the COB, maybe in a closed session in the same way that you would approach a CERT briefing. That would just be my kind of like educated guess on how we could handle that situation. But I think, designating a particular protocol, if there is an interest from the COB to glean more information, that we would want to discuss that obviously with the police department and see, what could be done in a way that is helping you all get like a better lens into things that are going on while not compromising the underlying criminal investigation. I'm sure Captain Kim might have some thoughts on that. No, nothing else. Did I capture what you? Okay, great. I got thumbs up. So it sounds like we're probably aligned on that, but we can certainly discuss further during our, check-ins with one another, and then, come back to you all with any sort of more specific guidelines if there's an interest in that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Haven't seen anyone else join the meeting without a name. So I still don't think we have our public comment queued up. I'm gonna suggest having gotten to the other agenda items, I think we need to vote to adjourn since we didn't have public comment. But let's go ahead and I'll hear a motion to adjourn early.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn early.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second it.
Wonderful. All in favor, aye? Aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed, nay? Any abstentions? Okay, we will adjourn early, follow up with our public comment request for the next meeting. And I hope everyone has a safe, fun, restful, healthy holiday. Mommy, have the happiest birthday. We love and celebrate you. And we hope to see some of you next week on the 19th at Christian Dorsey's farewell. Captain
Thank
Kim,
you all.
Lynn, and Graham, thank you for joining us this evening. Members of the public, we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye,
Thank you
everybody.
all. Happy
Bye.
holidays. Happy
Everybody,
New
happy
Year.
holidays. Happy New Year.